What is up, and welcome back to Talking Nutrition. We are back with our second Steptember Q&A call. Actually, this call I had to break it up in two. It turned out to be another full hour. Now this time I added the timestamp so it's easier to navigate your questions. I tried to kind of like lump them together, based on topic, but we had so many. I mean, we do have 38 people in the challenge, so it's a lot of questions to go through. I had 5 people, actually 6 with me, who lasted through the whole call. And most people are watching the replay. But hey, that's also why I wanted to share this with you. We touch on a lot of good stuff. We touch on protein quality, which actually got me going down a rabbit hole, which will be a new video blog. I post, I'll talk about this on a podcast too, I think, about the protein quality score. That was a great chat. We talked about fiber, things like just processed foods versus minimally processed foods, high fat versus low fat foods, why it's important to really take care of your diet, especially as we age, how stress impacts nutrition. We had a whole bunch of different topics. Really good chat. Now here's the thing, I also don't want to overwhelm you with too much stuff, you know what I mean? And listening to a full an hour Q&A, I could imagine that at some point you're going to be it's I get it. Okay, cool. So for that reason, I am splitting this up in 2 episodes. Today is going to be a nice 30-minute episode. So let's dive in. Next week will be part 2 of this Q&A. And then afterwards, we're going to talk probably mostly mindset. I still have to kind of decide, but you'll find out. Anyway, let's get into it. I'll talk to you soon. First question, Kaya says, is it better to eat full fat versions of products instead of low fat? For example, milk, butter, cheese. There's so many options. Ultra processed versus less processed. I kind of hate the term ultra processed. It is a term, obviously. I know what it means, and it is a thing. But it's almost like a term that's being used currently to really fucking make people afraid of certain foods. But there's actually no bad food. There's not one single food that's inherently by itself going to make your whole diet bad. You can have a good diet and a bad diet. Your good diet, right, would be mostly minimally processed foods / whole foods, where single ingredient foods are usually going to be your best bet. So let's start there, right? And we're talking about kind of an 80-20 ratio. And I mean, people who've been here for a little while, you've heard me talk about this over and over again, 80-20, 80-20. It's part mindset. It's part, hey, your actual calories should be for 80% coming from minimally processed or whole foods. And then 20%, you can literally just have whatever you want. Yes, including the ultra processed foods. And I do get it, right? Obviously, we don't want your whole diet to be made up of ultra processed foods or even just processed in general. But I think we need to step away from the fucking fear mongering around specific foods and seed oils and all that stuff and sugar, whatever it is. That's the fault of the media as well as social media, the clickbaity shit, It's even with the diet sodas, which are also totally fine to drink. We need to kind of step away from the fear mongering and just focus on the good stuff. Can we add some protein? Can we add some fruits, vegetables, single ingredient foods for the most part? And then there's actually no reason to be afraid of any processed foods. And it's also these days, it's almost like if something is processed, it's bad. But let's understand too that there's a spectrum, right? From a single ingredient food all the way to, let's call it the ultra processed food, because obviously those are, a thing. We have the foods that are consistent of a whole bunch of different ingredients, half of what we don't even know what it is, the artificial whatever, sure. And usually it's high in fat, high in sugar, high in sodium, and that's really that combination that makes us really want to eat a lot of it. But still then, with not a single client, we don't ever look at that specifically. And I never have people remove stuff. We don't focus on that. We don't give it any attention. Of course, food quality matters. But like I said, we focus on the addition of the good stuff. And we also, over time, we work on actually being okay with including a little bit more processed food. And that's almost weird to say as a nutrition coach. But like I said, on social media, whatever, there's so much fear mongering and right. I mean, we know like nutrition information, it's being like the research is like being cherry picked. Data is literally twisted for like vegan documentaries, like Game Changers and all that, complete just lies and shit, which is not cool. Um, I'm all for different diets, but like people are literally using right certain studies and twisting numbers and right just to prove their point, to prove their agenda. But okay, getting specifically back to your question, is it better to eat more full fat versions or the lower fat? It actually doesn't matter. It actually doesn't matter at all. If you are in a fat loss phase, for example, it can be a really good idea to go with a low fat option. Why? Well, fat is the highest in calories. Doesn't make it bad. Doesn't make it bad. But fat is 9 calories per gram. Carbohydrate and protein is 4 calories per gram. The thermic effect, which is how many calories you burn from digestion, is pretty much nothing from fats. For a carbohydrate, that's 5 to 10%, which means that 5 to 10% gets burned off through digestion. And then for protein, it's even more, 20 to 30. That gets burned off through digestion, which means that you're actually getting even fewer calories. Anyway, long story short, fats highest in calories, which means that we can go for that lower fat option. That way, still have our milk, our butter, our cheese, whatever it is, our yogurts, right? And enjoy those products if we actually like that. And a skyr, for example, is a great idea, which is like pretty much no fat, or depending on which one you get, but it's like no fat, very high in protein, amazing option. Have that with berries, boom, there you go. That's like the perfect, right, snack or meal for when you're in a deficit diet. On the other hand, and we actually have a question today from someone who is currently in a reverse diet. We're having her eat more. She's a client of mine. In those scenarios, and you'll hear me recommend this later, we can switch to the higher fat option and benefit off that. I'm still usually going to push for a moderate to high carbohydrate diet, and we like to keep fats not completely at the minimum, but on the lower end, because that seems to be best for most people. A little bit depending on the person. And you'll see too, like carbs or fat ratios, like it's going to be very personal. So I hope that answers your question. They're both fine. That's like the TLDR version of my fucking too long answer. It's like they're both cool, totally fine. You can use those different foods as different tools in different scenarios. Then we have Samantha. What's up, Samantha? Question: I like periodically reviewing my 80-20. There you go, 80-20 rule, right? And she's a client, so she knows her shit. And what that looks like daily, because I can have tasty foods that aren't the most nutritious, just in moderation. Big word, moderation, right? So she says moderation was a mindset shift that I really worked on this year because, in quotes, junk food was all or nothing for me for a long time. Reviewing the 80-20 idea helps my brain stay on track. Now I'm wondering what the question is because it's more like a statement. But okay. Anyway, let me just quickly double check in the group. I have to double check this one. But she brought up a really good point. Let me see real quick. Okay, so I don't see any further. Okay, all good. So let me just expand on this and then we'll continue. But I do really, really like that she brought this up. This is a client, and Samantha's been in our group coaching program. She was one of the first people, actually the first cohort. And basically, with her, we focused like the first bunch of weeks. I want to say almost 2 months. We brought her all the way up from shitty diets like 1,200 calories, whatever, all the way up to 2,000. We just focused on having good foods in her diet, but then we worked through special scenarios, sometimes emotional eating, and these kind of things, all or nothing, right? It's a shift that we need to make. Because we can actually, like she said, we can have some and be okay. Now, I'm not sure what the actual question was going to be here. However, I can almost maybe guess or at least relate to what she's mentioned here. For example, what I could imagine is someone asking or wondering, hey, would we actually calculate the 20%? And I've actually changed my opinion on this, because I used to say, hey, it's not like we go out of our way and calculate it, and it's more of a mindset. It's more, hey, making better choices most of the time. This even goes for like anything else. With your steps, hey, as long as you hit your steps most of the time, you're good. Now, of course, in a challenge is different, but generally speaking, right? If you mostly sleep well, if you mostly drink plenty of water, right, you're good. There's lots you could get really fucking good results being 80% consistent. So it's also a mindset. It's also something that allows you to fuck up every now and then and be like, well, let me just pick it up. Cool, move on. Now, and what did I change here? I actually did switch from basically always telling people like, hey, we don't have to calculate that. Like, no, like I'll pull up their food log and let's actually calculate this. And I've used this with multiple people. And I talked to someone recently, and I basically just had to be like, hey, right now we're like at a 50-50. We need to get our shit back together. And that's what we worked on. And it took a couple of weeks, but then we're good again. Now, to her point, right? The being able to have the tasty, fun foods in moderation, that is such a big lesson to learn. And it's not easy, right? It takes time. And I want you guys to know, no matter what program you join, it's going to be a process to work through. Hey, guess why we do 6 months with our one-on-one clients, right? At least. Guess why we're actually bringing the group, or we just did that, to a 3-month minimum instead of month to month. It takes time. We need our time to work through shit, So I hope that makes sense. And I really want everyone, even if this is the only thing you take away from this call, that 80-20 principle is huge. If you want to learn more about this, by the way, it's also called flexible dieting. There's a book called Flexible Dieting, which I highly recommend to everyone. Really good book by Alan Aragon. Highly recommend that one. If you like reading, check that out. If you like listening to audiobooks, go for it, right? Next question. Like I said, I should keep it a little bit more to the point here. Kelly says, my questions are related to ultra processed foods as well. In England, most people's diets are made up of approximately 60% ultra processed foods. What would you advise for trying to reduce this number? I kind of answered it already, but I don't advise anyone to reduce it. Not directly, at least. Like I said, instead of focusing on the scary ultra processed foods, is like, hey, we have our guidelines, and I also call it like eating like a fucking grown up, where, hey, we need to get our fruits and vegetables in. That's a given. And we all know that. And with those, as much as like there's like the green powders and all that, you can't get around. It's not the same. It's fine to get a multivitamin. It's fine to have a green powder, but it's not the same. We need to get our fruits and vegetables in, for example, right? We need protein, a good amount of protein with every single meal. Like there's a couple of basics there, right? That we want to get in: our fiber, our whole grains, our healthy fats from, cold water fish like salmon, getting our omega-3s in, nuts and seeds, avocado, extra virgin olive oil, right? Mostly complex carbs, meaning, like I said, those single ingredient foods, like have a sweet potato, right? Have those really good foods for us, just like minimally processed stuff. If we focus on that, we don't have to worry about the ultra processed stuff, because 60%, yeah, like that's a pretty bad fucking ratio. That means basically 60-40, like 40% whole foods and 60% ultra processed. So absolutely, don't get me wrong either, right? Absolutely, we need to bring you to that 80-20 ratio. And hey, by the way, if we go on a diet and we're in the fat loss phase, we have people do 90-10. Because let's be honest, when you are in the fat loss phase, we're not going to fuck around and like puzzle like alcohol and like go too crazy with the fun foods. Like, no, it's a couple months where we tighten the grip, we get a little bit more strict, we suck it up, because guess what? If you do that, you're going to get better results, which is more motivating, you lose more weight, and guess what then? You can get to go back again and have the fun stuff a little bit more in moderation. That's why in the diet, I always say 90-10. But once again, like we have a more like additive approach, right? I actually don't waste any energy on someone who eats too much chocolate. I just had a talk with someone about this. They're like, hey, I really feel like I'm addicted, right? To sugar, to chocolate. I always crave this stuff. And guess what we did? We didn't focus on the chocolate at all. I saw that her protein and her fiber were both too low. We brought that up. Guess what happened? No more cravings, no more issue. I'm not saying this is the only solution. There's multiple factors. Sleep can be a big one that really messes with our willpower, make you more hungry, less satiated, right? Etc. is going to play into, hey, us being willing to make those healthy food choices. So, like I said, it's easier said than done, but still, 80-20. That's the way to go. Focus on 80%. Focus on the 80 to 90%, and then you're good. And of course, that's a gradual change. Daniel says, balancing between light and dark meat. Researchers say that you should be careful with red meat. If you eat fish twice a week for dinner, how would you have spent the rest of the week with a mix of dark and light meat? Yeah, so this is where we need to understand that research needs to be understood correctly and used correctly. And we need to also understand that association doesn't mean causation. And that's basically a fancy way of saying like, hey, it might go hand in hand when they look at specific groups in populations, right? But it doesn't have to be the root cause. Here's the thing. I know we tend to think that research shows that red meat is bad for you, that it causes cancer. Does not seem to be the case. Red meat is the most nutritious meat you can eat. You get the most vitamins and minerals out of that. Way more than chicken or anything else. So red meat is actually some of the best meat you can eat. It's not going to cause cancer. You know what does? Having all of your red meat from all of the processed foods, that's probably going to cause it. And a plethora of other unhealthy things that are usually combined with those kind of lifestyles. So red meat, totally fine. We should be eating red meat on a regular basis. Here's the thing too. As much as I love chicken, for example, chicken thighs, chicken breast, it's also like when you continue, like let's say that's your only protein source, which I do feel like in the fitness phase is almost like that's like the go-to. And let's be honest, it's a really nice option. Of course, I have it a lot. It's, you know, you can do a lot with it, you know, like I do like it. But when you have the same food over and over and over and over again, you can actually cause sensitivities to that specific food just from having it so much, which is a real thing. So that's why I always say just change it up. We can repeat stuff, definitely, but let's also change it up. Hey, maybe you mentioned your light meat, your dark meat, and your fish, right? You mentioned fish twice a week. Okay, let's just repeat those 3 in a row. Let's say, let's call it dinner, right? One day light meat, one day fish, one day dark meat, etc. Just keep going like that. Just alternate. That's a great way to do it. But I do want to, you know, state that yes, generally, like people tend to think that research shows that, but it's actually not true. It's misunderstood. Red meat is very healthy for many different reasons, and it is totally fine. When it becomes an issue is when people really start to have a shitty diet. Like I said, it's not a bad food or whatever. Like, no, it's a bad or a good diet. Going back to the processed foods, if it's not 80-20, if it's like, let's call it like, you know, like in the UK, for example, or 60% plus processed foods, Also thinking, okay, like let's say someone eats at McDonald's every single time, and that's where their red meat comes from. Okay, we're also drinking a whole bunch of, sugary drinks and all those kind of things. Okay, again, if it's the majority of your diet, that's when it becomes an issue. So again, just alternate between the three. There you go. That's a great way to do it. Caroline says, how to eat enough protein in a vegetarian diet. You put it on a plate and you grab a fork and then, no, I'm kidding. So a vegetarian diet, you can still very easily get your proteins in. What much easier than vegan diet, by the way, which is still possible. But vegetarian diet, so eggs is going to be a big one. Eggs, by the way, kind of related to Terry's question, eggs are also fucking demonized. Like you hear crazy claims like, right, oh, eggs are just as bad as cigarettes. I've heard clients of mine who used to go to a dietitian who were told that. 100% full of shit. Like that's the craziest thing ever. Like eggs are super healthy. Same type of deal. The egg yolk is so full of vitamins, B vitamins, choline. Like it's super good for us. The protein is one of the best forms of protein that we can get out of all the options out there. The same type of deal there. Like for some reason, there's like these weird ideas around certain foods. And I know this is not related to your question, but like that's something I wanted to bring up. Because eggs, for example, great option. I will say this, as much as eggs are good for protein, they are higher in fats or calories, from fats. So I like to see eggs more as like an okay protein fat source, if that makes sense. Hey, maybe you can add egg whites. That's maybe one way to go about it. I'm thinking dairy products. So if you're vegetarian, you're going to have to rely on eggs, on dairy. I'm thinking there's a lot of protein milks. We have like the Skyr drink here now. Skyr yogurt, which is like a 0% fat or very low percent fat, high protein yogurt. Really good option. Very nice. I love that stuff. Very affordable also. Just not when you live in Norway. It's like everything is expensive. Cottage cheese, for example, very similar, right? Kind of similar kind of macro ratio. Not everyone loves the texture, but hey, you can work around that maybe. But those kind of things, like dairy products, are going to be great. That's also a very good option. I do like, so I always tell people like, hey, if you go with supplementation, it's cool. Don't make it your main source, but especially with vegetarian and vegan diets, it can be very beneficial to have a quality protein powder. And in this case, if you're vegetarian, I would go with a whey isolate. That's technically your highest quality option that you can get, and also affordable. Great to have that one. So that would be, so dairy, eggs. Then there's also your plant, right, options. Beans, legumes, lentils, chickpeas. Those are great. I will say that they're fine. They're just not mainly protein sources. They're like carb sources with an okay amount of protein, which is fine. We just need to remember that, because if we are in fat loss phase and we need to lower calories, maybe it's not the best to have those foods, because it's going to be way more difficult to play like macro Tetris to squeeze those in, Then again, I've seen amazing options, lentil pasta, chickpea pasta, those kind of things. Those are great. And there used to be a really good one here. They fucking discontinued it. There was like this lentil pasta. I used to love it. Very high in protein, almost equal to carbs. And that was a really nice option. So those kind of things do add up. It's just that, and this is my last point here to the vegetarian diet, or I think actually we have a question about vegetarian later, but yeah, in a few. But basically what happens too is people tend to think, okay, now I need to eat these plant options for my proteins. However, those proteins are not fully broken down as well, which means that you're going to have to eat more of that product to get maybe the same amount of protein. You're not always going to get all the amino acids, which I will say that's also one of those things where when you eat enough protein, you're probably going to be fine. It's also one of those things that gets taken out of proportion, right? It's on social media. But what you're gonna have to do is eat so much of those foods that now fiber gets way high, which is like a good amount of fiber is good, but when it's too much, it causes digestive issues, right? So we really want to be smart about that. And last tip, do not go for veggies for protein, if that makes sense. Like, don't rely on veggies for your protein. I will say that. That's also a big misconception. People think, oh, broccoli for protein. Like, you're gonna have to eat a whole lot of it, and your stomach is not gonna be happy. So, long story short, dairy products are great. Most fake meats are not that great. Before I forget, tofu, tempeh, those can be really nice. Quality whey isolate, and then I think you have a good start. But yeah, let's stay in touch about that anyway. Robin says, question, how much veggies, meat, fish should I eat in a week? What is recommended? So I call this the essentials. And feel free to maybe write this down, do whatever you want to do. Maybe I can even share this in a group. But the essentials would be almost like your flexible dieting checklist, where let's start with this, right? So one by one. Protein with every meal. Like I said, take notes, right? If you do this every single day, like, you're killing it. Protein with every meal. 1 to 3 servings of fruits per day. 1 to 3, right? It's probably best to be on the higher end if you're dieting. 2 to 4 servings of veggies per day. And with fruits and veggies, like, what do I mean by a serving? Let's call it like a fist size portion, just to make it simple. And for your protein, maybe like the quarter of your plate. Now, what else do we have? We have eating our omega-3 fatty fish. If you don't like those, that's cool. Let's call it, if we eat it like twice a week, we're probably good. We need those omega-3s. Very anti-inflammatory, very healthy for us. If you don't eat those, make sure to get a fish oil. But we need that, right? Now, so we got the fruits, veggies, the protein, the fish oil, hydration, drink when you're thirsty. That's the easiest way to go about it. We can calculate it, but drinking when you're thirsty and then having some more around training, you're probably good. Eating or getting at least a protein, carb, fat, and color with every meal. So anytime you come out with a meal, make sure you get something for your proteins, something for your carbs, for your fuel, right? Your fats, which is mostly for health and hormones, and then either a fruit or vegetable. Use that as your guideline, right? Other than that, we want to make sure, again, we stick to that 80-20 rule. And to be honest with you, like, that's pretty much it in terms of like what I would say. If you do that for almost all of your meals or most of your meals, let's call it 80-ish% of your meals, or 80-90, then you're absolutely killing it. And just sticking to like single ingredient foods, you know what I mean? But I would start there. Specifically to your question, veggies, 2 to 4 servings per day. Meat daily. If you like that, daily, yeah, you need to get your proteins in anyway. And meat is one of the best, if not the best option, or for you. So fish, same type of deal. Cold water fish like salmon, trout, twice a week. That would be great. I would start there. And with all those changes, right, like, remember to make changes like one step at a time. Catherine says, nutrition question. In your experience, what is the biggest pitfall when it comes to nutrition and getting in enough fuel for the body? I struggle a bit with the amount of food, and it's almost easier just to go the unhealthy route to get more calories in. Also, what are some good alternatives to chicken and pork, lean and white meat? Let me start with the last bit because that's the easiest. I would go with turkey. That's a great option there. Other than that, if you like fish, then a cod is very lean. But in your case, I'm going to be, or by the way, or like ground beef, very healthy. If you go with maybe like a low fat option. However, right, because you're asking for low and white meat here, and there's a reason I start with this part of the question. How about we don't look for those lean options? Because lean proteins are great, but they're by no means better than fattier meats or fish. So to your question, having a hard time getting enough in, let's have higher fat ground beef or higher fat cuts of beef. Have chicken thighs instead of chicken breasts. That's a little bit higher fat. Have salmon, right? Higher in fats, very healthy, right? But higher in fat, so you get more calories in. Swap the lean fish for something like that, or a trout or something, also higher in fats. Put olive oil on your food. Like you literally won't even notice, right? And it really adds up. And again, it's healthy fats. Going to your carbohydrate sources, because she's just coming out of a diet. During a fat loss phase, we want to have filling foods, right? Now, here, we actually want to flip that and we want to say, okay, let's still have healthy foods for the most part, but let's also make sure that, hey, let's say the boiled potato, which is the actual most filling food, let's swap that for maybe something like pasta or bread or wraps or those kind of things. That is totally cool. So it's playing with different foods with different scenarios. And in this case, I'd like to look into your food diary. So we should probably do that on Monday. During your next check-in, like, let's look at your 20%. Are you actually having your 20% on a daily basis? Because again, it's almost easier to go for those unhealthy foods. And I don't want you to mostly have that, right? You're in a reverse diet, like we're adding real foods in. But I'd still like to see that 20%. I still like to see that 20%. And by the way, guys, a glass of orange juice, 30 grams of carbs, right? That is 120 calories. Boom, there you go. That's the easiest shit. Sabrina has a question later on, and she mentions, hey, if you're busy and instead of having a meal, is it cool to have a smoothie? Boom, there you go. Have that. Have a good smoothie with a lot of micronutrients, right? Berries, maybe spinach, protein. Throw stuff together. Have like a milk that you really enjoy, like maybe a fattier one even, right? Make it easier to consume those calories. It's less about, again, like I don't want to see people reverse dieting and just add a whole bunch of shit. Like we're still going to control it. And the first 2 to 3 weeks, like I really want to see more single ingredient foods being added. But it doesn't mean that we can play with the more calorie dense / less filling foods that are still healthy. Make sense? And of course, she's a client as well. So we're going to be working on this. And I see this a lot. People are doing great during a fat loss phase. And guess what? Worldwide, we know that it's not the actual weight loss phase, right? That's the issue. People lose weight with crazy diets. It's what happens after. And we do this the right way, right? That's why our people do keep it off. It's like, hey, we do reverse diet. But here's the thing, it's an ongoing collaboration. It's like something we need to work on, client to coach, right? We need to hold you accountable and make sure that, hey, we go back and forth about these things because it's difficult. I've seen more people struggle with the eating more part, right, compared to eating less during a diet. So I want everyone to know here as well, wherever you are at in your journey, maybe you're just getting started, maybe you're just trying to eat enough. Just know that it's okay to have a hard time with that because it's very common, but share that with people, ask for help, try to be proactive and resourceful and figure this out because everything is figure outable.